Hey, what's up? It's Jesko again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. I'm back from my studio for another YouTube comments knowledge bomb. But this is a special one because it's part of the series that I'm doing in collaboration with HEDD Audio. So just quickly before I get started, if you want to watch the videos that I'm referencing in this video, have a look at, I think it's over here, the playlist in the card. And if you're in the market for a new speaker and you're considering HEDD Audio, may I suggest to look at the link in the description. If you buy through that link, you will be supporting both me and what I do with Acoustics Insider and obviously HEDD Audio. But with that, let's jump right into the questions. I'm gonna start with the first video that I did. So that was on phase compensation and whether you need it in your studio. So this question here is by Forlow. Now, I'm not trying to be smart here, just asking. I think of the example, I can't understand why the doors won't open altogether, and after that, it's a matter of speed. But if you fix this delay, don't you mess with the natural human hearing? And if you mix with this correction, how will it affect the playback in normal speakers? Maybe a silly question, don't know. Okay, so this is referencing my analogy to explain how phase smearing in a speaker works, and that it's kind of like imagining a dog race or a horse race where you have all these sort of cages at the starting line with a dog or a horse in each cage, and instead of them all opening at the same time to sort of start the race for every participant at the same time, they kind of open one at a time, and so certain parts of the starting line are basically delayed, if you will. So that's kind of how you can think about phase. So you don't understand why the doors won't open altogether. So that's just a question of speaker design, right? And it comes down mainly to the electronics. So the filters, the filter network that basically makes the different drivers work together, and they introduce a phase shift, a delay to certain parts of the spectrum, and that's why you get the high frequencies leaving the driver first, and then as you go down in frequency, the starting of the leaving of the energy from the speaker gets delayed more and more. So now the question is, if you fix this delay, don't you mess with the natural human hearing? I'm not entirely sure how that relates. You have to understand, I mean, imagine it this way. Our speakers, the point of the speakers is to represent or to play back the material that they're fed with as unaltered as possible, right? So basically, if there is a phase shift introduced through the speaker design, actually what it's doing is distorting in time the actual signal that they're fed with, right? So this phase compensation is just a step in a direction of trying to make the speakers as transparent as possible, basically trying to play back the signal that they're fed with as unaltered as possible. So I'm not entirely sure how that can mess with your natural human hearing. All we're trying to do is represent the waveform, the music, as transparently as possible. And what the human hearing then does with that is completely independent of the actual speaker. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, but I hope that answers that question. So if you mix with this correction, how will it affect the playback in normal speakers? Well, it doesn't affect the playback in normal speakers. It just affects how well you are able to hear what is actually in the material that you're working on. So you can just make more precise decisions about the material. So obviously this is mainly a time aspect, and if you look at the video, I go into more detail about how that affects what you're hearing. But basically you're just hearing the music more accurately, and so your decisions will be more precise. And that just gives you a better capability to mix the music so that it translates better across a broad set of speakers. I think that's kind of the best answer I can give at this point. But good question. So here's the next one by Mark de Vincentis. I agree that I learned what is phase coherence, but not why it is important. The argument that we want to have frequencies arriving at the listening position simultaneously seemed circular to me. It seems that sounds in nature will also exhibit phase dispersion. Okay, so it's not clear to me that our primitive brains would prefer phase coherence. I would like to see more practical demonstrations of the user benefit and not just graphs using pink noise tests that reinforce the premise. Otherwise, good video. Thanks for the question. I mean, so first of all, practically demonstrating this in a video is very difficult, right? I mean, just recording music played back through a speaker in a room is close to useless. Yeah, as a test. Yeah, this is something you really need to do in person. But it comes back, my answer comes back to what I just said before. Remember that the point of all of this is to make the speakers as transparent as possible. We basically want the speakers to do the best job at just playing back what they're fed with, yeah, so that we can then make accurate decisions. So this doesn't relate to how we hear sounds in nature, because with that argument, you're referring to the actual material that the speakers are playing back and not what the speakers are doing. Yeah. So, yeah, again, it comes back to making the speakers as transparent as possible and not having them change the music or the material, the information that they're fed with. So in that sense, it doesn't really matter how that relates to sounds in nature. I hope that answers the question. So here's the next one by A Music. Is there some downside of the phase linearization? Why would this not be left on by default? So the one downside, and I think somebody answered this below in the comments, and I can just agree to that. The one downside is that we need to delay the entire signal coming out of the speakers by a certain amount in order to give us a buffer in which we can then a buffer time during which we can kind of do the phase linearization, if you will. Yeah, so there is an overall delay introduced through engaging the phase linearization. And if you look at the video, that's roughly 15 milliseconds. So if you're just mixing, you can leave these on by default. Yeah, that is the answer to this question. I have them on. I have it on by default. I don't do any recording. I don't do any kind of real-time stuff. So I just have it on by default. But obviously, if you are doing real-time stuff, if you are recording, you're doing real-time monitoring, that might be too much time delay in order for you to be able to work properly. And in that case, you want to switch it off. Yeah, so that's why there is an option to switch it off. But apart from that, I don't see any downside. Good question. And with that, we're moving on to the second video in the series called Do Ported Speakers Make Your Low Frequency Decay in Your Room Longer? And the question is by Green Lounge Recording. I wonder if you could measure the difference if you set up the speaker outside in open air. Yeah, exactly. I didn't mention that in the video, but because we basically didn't have the option to do that, and it was with the time limit that I had and the kind of the capabilities that we had around the premise, I wasn't able to do that. But yeah, the one safe way to measure speakers accurately if you don't have a large anechoic chamber is to just take the speaker outside and measure it out in the open air, in a free field, if you will. But you do need quite a bit of space for that, and even that comes with certain tricks that you need to employ in order to make it work properly. But yeah, that's absolutely true. Good question. So this next one is by Michael T. on the same video. Does the decay time change if it's a rear ported speaker close up to the walls? So the short answer is no. There's obviously a slight change in kind of location to where the energy is emitted from regarding the location of the speaker, right? So there's a slight shift, but it's quite minimal. So there might be a slight difference in terms of how the energy is kind of emitted in the room and how the standing waves in particular are excited in the room. But I would imagine the change is so small that you can hardly register it. You also have to remember that basically at these low frequencies, the speaker plays or the speaker emits energy omnidirectionally. So it doesn't really matter where the port is on the speaker. There might be a slight change, but I doubt it's going to be noticeable. Good question. Moving on. This one is by J. Will, and it is on the latest video. Do desk reflection filters actually work? So the question is, I have an asymmetrical desk. Would it be disastrous if one of my heads was set to a heavier reflection filter than the other? No, absolutely not. Yeah. So the whole goal of messing with the frequency response of the speakers is, yes, on one hand, to get it kind of as balanced, as even as possible, as flat as possible, but also to get your speakers as similar as possible in tonality, in response. And so if there is a strong asymmetry on your room, it is very, very possible that your speakers will have quite different responses, frequency responses, and in that case, you need different EQ on your speakers in order to get them to match. Yeah, and that also includes the desk reflection filter. Yeah, so definitely feel free to set the reflection filter slightly stronger on one speaker than the other if you find that gets them closer together in tonality. Absolutely. And by the way, this whole topic of setting up your EQs properly on the back of your speakers is also something I cover in my free Phantom speaker test workshop that you could sign up to at the link in the description in order to set up your speakers and place your setup in your room, basically, when you're starting out with a new studio. So check that out if you want some more info and a sort of a step-by-step guide to obviously setting up your speakers, but then also figuring out what to do with your with your EQs on the back of your speakers. But moving on to the next question, same again for this latest video. This is by Average Guy. He says, bruh, ditch the desk, put monitor behind the speakers, get some small 80 to 20 centimeter panel, add mouse and keyboard on it, and there you go. Best way to solve that problem. Okay, sure. Yes, I mean, you're right. Ditch the desk. Obviously, getting rid of the desk will get rid of the desk reflection. You're absolutely right. And that is the standard kind of way to deal with this in high-end studios, mastering rooms. I'm sure you've seen this. They often work with very, very small desks, where the kind of the flat part of the desk is literally just big enough to fit your keyboard and your mouse, and they might have a kind of a 19-inch rack unit in front of that is kind of angled and gives them access to kind of the most important gear. But yeah, that is obviously also one way to deal with this. I remember saying in the video that there are really two ways. Obviously, you're right. This is the third way. It's to get rid of the desk. The thing is, in most home studios, that's a very limited option. That's, again, it's not really an option because you do need something to put your stuff in front of you. And for most people, that isn't really an option. So if you can do that, that's great. But don't consider this the end all be all solution. Again, I think in many ways, dealing with the desk reflection is something that you just kind of you can really only do properly once you have a big enough room where you can solve that issue through proper speaker and desk placement. Because even with these smaller desks, I've definitely seen reflections still happen. So it's still very much an angle thing. It also depends a lot on the actual speaker. So some speakers will push a lot less energy into the desk than others. So it's a matter of the combination of the speaker and the desk. Yeah? But yeah, obviously reducing or getting rid of the desk entirely will get rid of the desk reflection by definition. Moving on, this is by Everett Schutt, I guess. Schutt. I've often wondered about the influence of desk reflections. Thanks for this analysis. I was wondering if the height of your speakers in relation to the desk makes any difference. You could set up the speakers somewhat higher and angle them down, or does that make things worse? So first of all, yes, obviously the height of the speakers in relation to the desk makes a difference because it will change the angle and it will change the relative distance that reflection has to travel in relation to the direct sound. So again, because all of this comes down to speaker position in relation to the desk, obviously the speaker height makes a difference. Now, that said, I still don't like the option of setting up the speakers higher or lower down and angling them. In my experience, the stereo image, the soundstage will always suffer when you do that. So I always say, set the speakers at ear height by default. That is the starting position. And then you kind of build on that with certain other aspects of speaker positioning. Yeah, but I highly recommend to always keep your speakers at ear height. This idea of angling speakers has never properly worked, in my opinion. The compromise was always larger, in my experience, by doing that, than to just keep them at ear height and then just dealing with the reflection, having it happen and just accepting it. Yeah. So yes, it's something you can definitely experiment with. Obviously know that if you're setting up the speakers higher and angling them down, you're actually kind of shooting, or you're angling the on-axis response further down into the desk, and so you might actually make the energy that actually hits the desk larger. It might actually make the problem worse. So if anything, it would probably be more a question of lowering the speaker and angling them slightly up. But again, this is very dependent on your particular situation, your particular speaker, your particular geometry between your speakers and your desk. So it's something that you need to experiment with. But in my experience, it's always better to just start with your speakers at ear height and then work from there on out. Okay, moving on. This is by Troy Hall. Thank you for covering this topic. I've been wondering what a real effort into this would show. And you tried melamine foam on the desk, which is exactly what I tried. I still wonder what impact there would be if you cast a shadow by having acoustic absorption in the path between the speakers and the desk reflection points. It's not practical to have absorption on the desk itself, because what's the point in having a desk surface if you can't use it? Exactly. Good point. Thank you. Casting an acoustic shadow would seem to solve that problem. So yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right. That's why putting foam on the desk is not an option, because you need to be able to use your desk. Yeah, again, this is something you might want to experiment with, casting an acoustic shadow. You got to remember that you don't want to be blocking the actual speaker, yeah, as you do that. So I'm just kind of looking at my speaker now thinking, okay, where would that foam go to cast that shadow? And it would literally have to sit like right underneath the speaker, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Definitely try messing with that if you think that might work. It's definitely possible, but just keep in mind that you don't want to be blocking any of the actual drivers with the foam. All right. So good input. Moving on to the next question. This one is by the Psycho. Why didn't you mention to tilt the desk slightly? With around 10 degrees angled, it already improves and will send the reflections behind you instead of back to your ears. It's the same principle as putting the speakers further behind the desk, shallow angle. Yeah, this gets thrown around a lot. Obviously, with like a high-end production desk or a high-end studio desk, that's exactly what happens with the rack units. They're angled, obviously, to be able to use them, but they also just make sure that energy bouncing off of it doesn't, or the chance of it reflecting back to your ear is much, much smaller. Again, looking at this from a home studio, project studio kind of place, yeah, where you're just setting up in your spare bedroom and you've kind of got a standard desk and then just angling the entire thing. I haven't seen anybody do this and be comfortable with it. That's really the reason why I didn't mention it. I don't think it's something that most people will actually be comfortable with, because it's just super awkward to work on an angled desk. Yeah. So in my opinion, it's not a real option. It works technically, but in practice, it's just super annoying to have an angled desk. Yeah. So that's why I didn't mention that. But good input. Okay, and the final question, again on the desk filter question, is, so what if the monitors are on top of ISO stands on top of the desk? Yeah, what if the monitors are on top of ISO stands, on top of the desk? It doesn't change anything. Yeah, obviously, ISO stands, or isolation in the stands, is meant to stop energy from transmitting into the desk, but that has no effect on the geometry of speaker and desk together. So in terms of the desk reflection, ISO stands don't have an impact. I mean, this is purely a question of speaker location in relation to the desk. But still, valid question. So to wrap up, once again, I've got a brand new free video workshop for you if you are just setting up a new studio. It is the Phantom Speaker Test video course, how to set up your speakers correctly no matter what room you're in. You can sign up to that at the link in the description, and in that I walk you through all the steps that you need to take in order to set up your new studio, to get started with your new studio, especially if you're working from a slightly odd-shaped room and there are doors and windows in awkward places. Maybe there are some pillars, some odd cubbies, some odd corners. In that, I walk you through the process of how to identify the correct listening position in order to get a balanced bass response, how to set up your speakers correctly to get a proper sound stage that sounds like you're working on headphones, to get a proper phantom center. Obviously, that's why the course and the test is called the Phantom Speaker Test. And for any of you who are just setting up a new studio and you're wondering which direction to face in the room, where to actually place your setup, this course is exactly for you. So again, if you're setting up a new studio and you want concrete steps to get started, have a look at the Phantom Speaker Test workshop at the link in the description. And with that, let's wrap up this video. I hope I got you some valid answers to your questions. Keep them coming. There are some great new videos in the pipeline, so this series is going to continue on, and I'm going to be checking in with you, doing these YouTube comments, answers as we go along. So keep your eyes open. And with that, let's keep learning to trust our ears and get back to having fun making music in the studio. I'll see you in the next video.